So we're going to go through the different medications that we could possibly see. Not every single medication, but the most important medications, and then compare it to the respective disorders that they could be related to. And we will be starting off with antidepressants, going down to anti-anxiety medications. We'll go to the mood stabilizers. We'll get into the antipsychotics and ADHD medications, and then get into 10 practice questions, as well as tearing apart all of the disorders and easy ways to remember those. So let's start off with antidepressants. And antidepressants are going to be for depressive disorders. So brand name on the left-hand side and generic name on the right-hand side. And the exam doesn't really have a consistency whether it wants you to know the brand name or the generic name. So kind of knowing both of them is super duper, I guess, important. But again, don't memorize and beat yourself up if you're not able to understand each and every single intricacy of it. So most people are like, yo, the brand name is kind of more difficult to remember, as well as some people are like, the generic name is a little more difficult. So let's go through each of these and try to give some easy ways to remember it. So the first up to bat is going to be Zoloft. And the easiest way to remember this one is it kind of lofts your mood. It goes from being a depressed or low mood, and it helps loft it or raise it in some way. And then Effexor kind of affects how the person's mood is, because it's going to affect it in a more positive way. Wellbutrin helps you feel well. Trazodone helps the depression to be done. Celexa helps it select the mood. And then Lexapro helps you feel like a pro. And Prozac also makes you feel like a pro. So those are easy ways to remember the brand name if you are able to see them. And then on the generic side are the ones that people typically are like, dude, this is like impossible. But if you look very, very closely, INE is at the end of the majority of the antidepressants. So if you see INE at the end of it, then it is safe to say that it is going to be more of an antidepressant. And there's going to be a caveat, because antipsychotics also have INE at the end, and then some of them also have AM at the end, but that is going to be more helpful to remember the AM at the anti-anxiety meds. So those are just easy ways to remember the medication names. So Zoloft helps to loft your mood. Effexor affects your mood in a positive way. Wellbutrin helps you feel well. Trazodone helps the depression to be done. Celexa helps to select the mood. And Lexapro helps you feel like a pro. And Prozac helps you feel like a pro as well. And if you're kind of like, yo, that was kind of quick and I don't really know what you just said, just a little explanation at the end. Most generic names have INE at the end of the name, and you can just come up with clever ways for the brand names, but I kind of provided some already. But let's get into the disorders that we often see when we see these medications. And the first one up for the depressive disorders is major depressive disorder. And an easy way to remember the difference between the depressive disorders, there's often two that we will discuss. There's major depressive disorder and persistent depressive disorder. And if you remember that number two, you'll never forget the length of time, how to diagnose them. So major depressive disorder is 5 or more symptoms being present within the same 2-week period and represent a change from a previous functioning, and at least one of the symptoms are met. So since there are 2 of the depressive disorders, 2 weeks or longer, and persistent is going to be 2 years or longer. So since there's 2 disorders, 2 is the length of time that it takes to diagnose it. And one of the following symptoms have to be present for it to be diagnosed. So depressed mood or loss of interest or getting less pleasure from things that they would have enjoyed prior to the depressive episode. So now once we have those, we'll allude to the 5 or more symptoms that we have to have. So you have to have 1 or more of the following. So depressed mood or loss of interest or getting less pleasure. And then once you have one of those, you have to have 5 or more of the 9 symptoms. So depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day, as indicated by the feelings of sadness, feeling empty, hopelessness, or observations from others, such as someone being tearful, down, or isolating themselves. So this is an interesting part, is Major depressive disorder, you don't directly have to get the information from the person. You could observe it as well. So that's kind of a spin on it because most of them you have to hear it directly from the person. The second possible symptom is diminished interest or lack of pleasure in almost all or most activities nearly every single day. So these first two symptoms mirror one of the following that you had to have: the depressed mood or loss of interest or getting less pleasure from things that you would have enjoyed. So those are kind of be a given. So you'll have one, but you have to have four or more other ones, which is significant weight loss, which in the DSM is a change of around 5% of the person's body weight without dieting or trying to lose weight in any way, shape, or form. Insomnia, meaning they can't sleep, or hypersomnia, meaning they're getting more sleep and sleeping longer than they would have wanted to nearly every day. Psychomotor agitation or retardation. Agitation meaning they can't stop, or the retardation is the slowness of their behavior. So moving quicker or being slower than they would have normally been on a normal day. Fatigue or loss of energy nearly every day. So they have low energy, or they're easily fatigued when they go to do things. So they're getting tired out without much effort at all. Feelings of worthlessness or excessive or inappropriate guilt or remorse for things that they have done or that they've been a part of or went through. So that's a big deal. It's like those ruminating thoughts within the situation of nothing's ever going to get better. I was so dumb. I can't believe this is the case. Lack of concentration or motivation around completing tasks, or having indecisiveness around completing the task. So they'll maybe create a long list and not get to any of them, or they'll have a long list and not be able to stay focused or keep on track with what they would have wanted to have seen for themselves. So it's kind of like a losing battle of like, I'm feeling low about myself. I want to complete these tasks. I don't do it. So it makes me even lower. Or recurrent thoughts of death. So not just active suicidal ideation, but they may just have fleeting thoughts of not wanting to live. They may have recurrent suicidal ideations without a specific plan. So they're like, hey, I do want to kill myself, but I'm not really sure how I would kill myself or how I'd want to die, or a serious suicide attempt with plans and means to do so. So this is where it can be kind of tricky because people could have fleeting thoughts of suicide, but they don't really want to complete the action, or they don't have any specific plans. So understanding what is the severity of it and moving on from there. And then kind of some extracurricular criteria as well is the symptoms cause a clinically significant impact on the person's functioning in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. So this is where it's going to be very, very interesting because a lot of the disorders are going to have it with only a handful of them not having that clinically significant impact. And then the episode is not attributable to the physiological effects of substance use or another medical condition. So substance use or medical conditions are one of the two major things that you want to make sure are not present when you're diagnosing, because the effects of being intoxicated or withdrawing from substances can mirror some mental health disorders, as well as if someone has a medical condition, like if they are diagnosed with specific medical conditions, they can mirror mental health symptoms as well. So that's why it's super important to understand if there's any substance use or medical conditions within the question prior to being able to diagnose effectively a mental health disorder. And the occurrence of the major depressive episode is not better explained by another mental health disorder, so schizoaffective disorder, which is often psychosis with a mood disorder mixed in, schizophrenia, schizophreniform, delusional disorder, or other specified or unspecified disorders. Other specified meaning it could have criteria or symptoms for another disorder, or unspecified disorders, meaning you don't have enough criteria to diagnose that specific disorder at this time. And there has not been a manic or hypomanic episode, because if there has been a manic or hypomanic episode, it could be better explained by bipolar 1 or bipolar 2 disorder. And once that mania or hypomania exists, you want to more lean towards our mood disorders rather than just a depressive disorder. And the second possible depressive disorder is persistent depressive disorder. And the key detail here is it's persistent because it persists over time. Major depressive disorder was a major event, so it was one significant thing. Persistent means that it has persisted over time and longer than the prior. And if we want to use the cool trick, since there's only 2 depressive disorders, we are then going to use that as the length of time. So it is 2 years or more. So it's a depressed mood for most of the day, for more days than not, as indicated by either subjective accounts of the symptoms, meaning the person is telling you, or those observations from others for at least 2 years or more. And in the children, we kind of slice it in half, and that would be at least 1 year or longer at that time. So for adults, since there's 2 depressive disorders and it's either 2 weeks or 2 years, persistent is persisted over time, so it's longer, so it's 2 years or more. For children, it's at least 1 year or longer. And the symptoms kind of mirror what major depressive is, but it kind of hones in to less specific. So presence while depressed of 2 or more of the following symptoms. So there's 2, which in major depressive disorder, it was 5 or more. And the symptoms are poor appetite or overeating, insomnia, meaning they're not sleeping, or hypersomnia, meaning they're sleeping more than they would have liked to, low energy or fatigue, low self-esteem, poor concentration, or feelings of hopelessness. And they only need to have 2 or more of the symptoms. And again, the length of time is 2 years or longer for adults, or 1 year or longer for children. So during the 1 for the children or 2-year period for the adults of the disturbance, the individual has not been without criteria for longer than 2 months. So if somebody has been in remission from the depressive disorder for more than 2 months, the clock would start back over and they would actually be a major depressive disorder, not persistent depressive disorder. So if they have that more than 2-month period, it then resets the clock. So criteria for MDD may be consistently present for 2 years. So it could be kind of a handoff of they had major depressive disorder. It's been longer than that 2-year period or that 1-year period for children and adolescents. So there's not been any manic or hypomanic episodes, and criteria has not been met for cyclothymic disorder. So that mania or hypomania episode would lead us to bipolar 1 or bipolar 2 disorder. And cyclothymic disorder is a version of a mood disorder such as bipolar 1 or bipolar 2, but the manic swings, they're more manic than they are depressive. So their depressive episodes are not as severe or significant, so they're quickly cycling through manic or hypomanic episodes. The disturbance is not better explained by a persistent schizoaffective disorder, schizophrenia, delusional disorder, or other specified schizophrenia disorder. So again, those mixtures of all of those different psychosis may be delusions and hallucinations. And we'll get into it a little bit further when we go over to the psychotic disorders. And the symptoms are not better attributable to a physiological effect of a substance use or another medical condition. And as I kind of said prior, substance use and medical conditions are some of the only things that can mirror mental health symptoms. So we always want to rule those out first, so that way we don't misdiagnose someone or clump them into a mental health disorder that they don't entirely have in the absence of the medical condition and or substance use. The symptoms cause a clinically significant distress or impairment in the social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. And I'm going to say that quite a bit because most disorders are going to have that criteria as well, because it has to have a clinically significant impact within the situation. So now moving in to the next neighborhood of anti-anxiety medications. So the brand name, again, is on the left, and the generic name, again, is on the right. So kind of, again, there's going to be themes of the generic name and the brand name. You tend to have to they're more recognizable. So for the generic name, there is going to be LAM or PAM, because PAM needs anxiety meds to handle her LAM. So if you see PAM or LAM at the end, and of course there's going to be outliers, but oftentimes on the brand name, you're going to be able to remember them. But some tricks, again, Xanax tends to X out the anxiety. Klonopin puts the pin in the anxiety and kind of holds it together. Volume turns down the volume of the anxiety. Ativan drives away the anxiety. Boost par tends to stay on par and not regulate above or below. And Librium helps keep an equilibrium when anxiety comes into play. So those are just easy ways to remember the brand names, and then the generic names. Pam needs anxiety meds to handle her lamb. So those are just some easy ways to kind of remember and mess and play and try to understand the anti-anxiety meds a little bit better, rather than just looking at them and being like, holy smokes, what am I going to do? I'm not sure what I'm doing. So just kind of keeping yourself within the situation and understanding this is what could be helpful. So now let's get into the disorders that are often associated with it. So the first one is generalized anxiety disorder. And the easy way to remember this is they're anxious in general. So they tend to be generally anxious. There's no specific triggers or no specific things that they're looking at in the situation. So someone has excessive worries more days than not for longer than 6 months. And this is going to be a theme, if you remember, in our depressive disorders, 2 disorders, 2 weeks, or 2 years. Most anxiety disorders are going to have 6 months or longer. So that is going to be the tricky part, is the length of time is not going to differentiate the type of anxiety disorder you're looking at, but the way and the symptoms are going to distinguish it more so than the others. So the easy way to remember generalized anxiety disorder is you're anxious in general, and no one specific thing is leading into that. So the number of criteria or symptoms that you have to have is 3 or more symptoms over that 6-month period. So restlessness or feelings of being on edge. So being able to react at any given moment, or being like, something bad's going to happen, I need to be, so kind of like hyper vigilant in the situation. Being easily fatigued. So again, kind of like you're wanting to do things, but you're exhausted easier, or your mind is like running 100 miles an hour and your body's not able to really keep up with it. Difficulty concentrating on things or thoughts moving in multiple directions. So kind of like flight of idea. Like you have so many things that you want to get done, but you don't really have the motivation to get them done, but they keep cycling through your head, and you're almost like getting exhausted based on the fact that you're not able to complete the task as fast as or as efficiently as you would want it to. Irritability or shouting at people. So when you're super anxious or have a lot of things to do, start shouting at people because you're not able to really get them done. Muscle tension or muscle soreness. So your body is kind of at that moment being able to be like, and then sleep disturbance. So not being able to sleep, or staying up at night, not being able to get down and stay relaxed in the moment. And the anxiety or worry has clinically significant impact on the person's life or their functioning in some way. And the disturbance is not better attributable to another mental health disorder or substance use intoxication or withdrawal. Because if someone's intoxicated on a stimulant, the chances of them having these symptoms of like flight of idea, being restless, not being able to slow down, not being able to calm down, is very likely. So if they're not utilizing a stimulant substance such as cocaine, crack, maybe even an amphetamine, methamphetamine, Adderall, etc., then you can put them into the anxiety, but it has to be an absence of the substance. The next anxiety disorder we'll go over is social anxiety disorder. And the key emphasis is on social. So any social situation this person is going to be in could create anxiety. So it's a marked fear or anxiety about one or more social situations in which the individual is exposed to possible scrutiny by others. So again, key emphasis on social. So anything related to social situations where scrutiny could be a present. So for example, social interaction. So having a conversation or meeting unfamiliar people in any way, being observed, maybe eating, conversating, etc., or performing in front of people, such as giving a speech or doing an ASWB study group about meds and the DSM-5. So any possibility of like messing up or trying to communicate or convey things in some way, and you're like, oh my gosh, are they understanding this? Are they even knowing what I'm saying? Does it even make sense? Why am I even doing this, etc.? So in children, the anxiety must occur in peer situations and not during an interaction with an adult. And that's super duper important, because stranger danger. You're not going to expect a child to be super duper comfortable talking to a stranger or someone that they have never ever interacted with, based on the fact that it's an unfamiliar situation. So the individual fears that he or she will act in a manner that will be negatively evaluated in some way, shape, or form. And additionally, if they show anxiety symptoms, they feel like they can be negatively viewed as well. So I admit I'm super duper nervous, or I start like sweating, I start fidgeting, I start doing all of these things. And I'm like, oh my God, are these people going to actually understand what I'm saying? Or, wow, they probably think I'm dumb. Why am I doing this? Etc. And the social situation almost always provokes anxiety or fear. So in children, the fear or anxiety may be expressed by crying, tantrums, freezing, clinging, shrinking, or failing to speak in social situations. So this is the big detail within the situation is children experience and express anxiety a little bit different than an adult may do so. So this is keeping that in mind. So the social situations are avoided or endured with intense fear or anxiety. So even though the person has social anxiety disorder, does not mean that they are going to avoid social situations or not ever be existent in the social situations. So even if they're going into the situation, they're experiencing that fear or anxiety. The fear or anxiety is out of proportion to the actual threat posed by the social situation. So if I'm feeling anxious during the study group, start sweating, start stuttering, start like, oh my God, I need to get the heck out of here. So you just stop hearing me talk. And I'm like, oh my God, everything is, they all hate me. I can't handle this. I'm not even sure what I'm supposed to be doing. Most people, when I express that or tell them that, they're going to be like, yo, it's not that big of a deal. These people care about you. They obviously understand and support your style. But I'm like, yep, I messed up. Everything is over. I can't believe it. Everyone's going to hate me. That's out of proportion of the actual situation, because it's highly unlikely to imagine that if someone is coming and pursuing something with you, that they're going to negatively scrutinize you or like hate you in some way based on a small action. The fear, anxiety, or avoidance is persistent, with typically lasting at least 6 months or longer. So kind of reiterating that length of time of most anxiety disorders are going to be 6 months or longer, just knowing the specifics and utilizing the title of the disorder to differentiate amongst the different anxiety disorders. So now moving on to the next one, separation anxiety disorder, key emphasis on separation, because it's going to be marked fear around separation from a significant person, caregiver, parent, etc. in the person's life. So developmentally inappropriate or excessive fear or anxiety concerning the separation from those whom the individual is attached to, as evident by at least 3 of the following. So the symptoms here are going to be 3 of them. So it's kind of like different from the others based on the fact that it kind of varies. But again, length of time is going to be the same. So 3 or more of the following. So recurrent or excessive distress when anticipating or experiencing separation from home or from a major attachment figure in the person's life. So it's like, it doesn't really have to be a location, but as long as that significant person is associated with that location, it may be marked distress. So persistent and excessive worry about losing a major attachment figure in their life or about possible harm to them, such as illness, injury, disaster, or death, where it's not otherwise possible or a significant possibility. Persistent or excessive worry about experiencing an unexpected event. So getting lost, being kidnapped, having an accident, or being separated from the major attachment figure in their life in some way. Persistent or excessive refusal or reluctance to go out, away from, to school, to work, or anywhere away from the attachment figure because of fear of separation or something negative happening to that attachment figure in some way, shape, or form. Persistent and excessive fear of or reluctance about being alone or without their major attachment figure at home or in other settings. So if that major attachment figure leaves this person's presence, they start getting marked distress. So persistent reluctance or refusal to sleep away from home or go to sleep without being near their major attachment figure. Maybe needing to be in the room with the person, maybe having that person check on you, maybe being in the room when you go to sleep and then you wake up and they're not there. You kind of like have marked distress as well. repeated nightmares involving the theme of being separated from their attachment figure or the attachment figure being harmed in some way, repeated complaints of physical symptoms, headaches, stomach aches, nausea, or vomiting when separated from their major attachment figure or when an anticipated separation occurs. In the big detail is when separated from the major attachment figure. And you may be wondering, why is that a key detail? Because most physiological symptoms, when it's associated with anxiety, is going to be with panic disorder. But in separation anxiety disorder, if they're experiencing the physiological symptoms, it can be explained by being separated from the major attachment figure. When it's being experienced during a panic disorder, the person may not be able to identify the trigger when it does occur. So that's super duper important to highlight there of it's predicated on being separated from the major attachment figure. The fear, anxiety, and or avoidance is persistent at least 4 weeks in children, and you'll never guess for adults, ring, 6 months or longer in adults. And that kind of stays consistent with our anxiety disorders being 6 months or longer. The disturbance causes clinically significant impacts or distress in social, occupational, or other impactful areas or important areas of functioning in the person's life. The disturbance is not better explained by another mental health disorder, such as refusing to leave home because of excessive resistance to change, autism spectrum disorder, delusional hallucinations concerning separation in a psychotic disorder, etc. So kind of ruling out and making sure that it's not associated with another mental health disorder or the physiological effects of a medical condition and or under the intoxication or withdrawal of a substance. So now moving into our next disorder, panic disorder, and the key emphasis on panic because the person is going to be in a panic and there's not a real trigger that they can identify for this panic. So this is kind of going to be an oddball when it comes to the anxiety disorders because it's going to step away from our 6 months or longer theme. So someone will have recurrent unexpected panic attacks, key emphasis on unexpected, because the person isn't able to really identify when they're occurring. And a panic attack is an abrupt surge of intense fear or intense discomfort with the onset sometimes being unknown. So you have to have 4 more of the following symptoms. So as I said, it's going to be more physiological or physical symptoms within the person's situation. So palpitation, so heart pounding super duper fast, sweating, trembling or shaking, shortness of breath, feelings of choking, chest pain or discomfort, nausea or sensations to vomit, feeling dizzy, chills or overheating type sensations, so extreme body fluctuation temperature wise, numbness or tingles throughout the body, derealization, so kind of feeling like things are not real and like they're outside of their body, fear of losing control, or fear of death. So at least one of the panic attacks have been in the last month. So again, at least one has been in the last month. So that's the length of time we're going to be looking at is 30 days or less. So must have one or both of these. So the symptoms they have to have in addition to the 4 above are persistent concern or worry about additional panic attacks occurring or fear of having a heart attack. So again, not really being able to predict when they're happening, but when you do have a panic attack, you worry that you're going to have another one. A significant maladaptive change in behavior to avoid having a panic attack or perceived ability to prevent one. So, such as avoiding exercise because exercise would raise your heart rate and you associate heart rates with the panic attacks, and maybe avoiding social situations because you may assume that it's related to social situations, etc. And the symptoms are not better described by another psychological disorder or substance use intoxication or withdrawal. Because again, you want to rule out those other factors, other mental health disorders and or substance use. So that's going to wrap up our anxiety disorders. And then we're going to move into our mood stabilizers or mood disorders. And again, the brain name is going to be on the left and the generic name is going to be on the right. And I have AP because AP is antipsychotics, because antipsychotics can oftentimes be given to people to help their mood disorders. So there's not a really easy way to remember those. So you just have to kind of memorize or get familiar with these ones because there's not any real tricks, with the exception of Depakote, because Depakote helps to coat the mood and make it better. But other than that, there's not any real tricks related to those. So I apologize on that. So you just kind of have to kind of like get acquainted with them and get familiar. So the brand names: lithium, Depakote, Lamictal, Haldol, Risperdal, Latuda, or Abilify. And again, AP is going to be our antipsychotics, so they can double count for them. And the disorders we're going to see are bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 disorder. And a lot of times people are like, Phil, I get super duper tripped up on these and I don't really know how to differentiate the two. Well, sit back and I'll try my best to explain the difference between the two. So bipolar 1 most commonly has manic episodes, and it does not require an episode of depression. So someone will experience a manic episode, often accompanied by an episode of depression, but it does not require it. And this is going to be a key difference between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, is bipolar 2 requires an episode of depression. Bipolar 1 does not. And I'll get into a little bit more of the differences as we go through it, but keep that in mind. A manic episode is described as 3 or more of the following, and they must be present for 1 week or longer. So if you remember bipolar 1, 1 week or longer. So you can kind of utilize the name to tell you what disorder we're looking at. So 3 or more of the following. So keep that in mind. So as we go through these different symptoms. So inflated sense of self-esteem or grandiosity. Someone thinks they're better than they actually are, or they overplay the abilities that they have and they don't actually possess those skills. Decreased need for sleep. So feeling rested after only 3 hours of sleep, or not going to sleep at all, having your mind run so much that you're not able to sleep. More talkative than normal, or feels pressure to have conversations with people in some way, shape, or form. So when they walk up to somebody, they feel like they have to say something. And if they don't say something, they feel less than and or inferior to other people. Flight of idea, or where their thoughts will run through their head and they're not able to slow them down. Kind of just being like a ton of things running through your mind and you're not ever really able to keep up with them. So it's almost like a glimpse of things and it's like it overwhelms you. Distractibility, or finds it difficult to stay on track. So with that flight of idea, with the distractibility, they may have a ton of things that they want to do. They'll create a list of wanting to get them done and not accomplish any of them, or they'll half start a lot of them and not remember that they wanted to do it and then go back to the behavior and say, I didn't even remember starting this. Or they get so overwhelmed by doing multiple tasks at the same time that they just kind of lose track of where they're at. Or increasing goal-oriented activities, again, kind of setting goals for themselves that they don't ever really get to complete, or overwhelming themselves by scheduling way too many things and not able to maintain all of those. Excessive involvement in activities with high potential for painful or negative consequences. So spending money they don't have, engaging in a lot of sex, engaging in unprotected sex, substance use, or any like foolish business ideas. So starting up a ton of businesses, losing all their money or investing their money and kind of getting scammed out of things, or like getting over convinced. And the symptoms have a clinically significant impact on the person's functioning, such as hospitalization, self-harm, or homicidal ideations. And this is going to be a key difference between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 as well, is bipolar 1 has a clinically significant impact on the person's functioning. Bipolar 2 does not require that. So the two differences that we see so far is it does not require an episode of depression, and it does require it have a clinically significant impact on the person's functioning. And an easy way to remember manic and hypomanic episodes is dig fast. So each letter in dig fast represents a symptom. So distractibility, increased goal-oriented activity, grandiosity, flight of idea, activities that could be risky, sleep disturbance, and forced talkativeness. So that is just an easy way if you're like, crap, I don't remember the symptoms. Just remember dig fast, because the person's digging fast without an intention of where they're actually going. So now moving on to hypomania, which is often more associated with bipolar 2 disorder, but also could be present with bipolar 1 disorder. So hypomania, mania was 1 week or longer. Hypomania is at least for 4 days or longer. So hypomania requires less of a length of time, and the symptoms are almost identical. So keep that in mind as we kind of go through it. So inflated sense of self-esteem or grandiosity, feeling like they're better than they actually are. Decreased need for sleep, so they feel rested after 3 hours of sleep, or they just don't go to sleep in general. They're more talkative than normal, or feel pressure to have conversations with people. So talking to people, and if they don't, they feel like inferior. That flight of idea where thoughts will run through their head and they cannot slow them down. Distractibility, or finds it difficult to stay on track. Increase in goal-oriented activities. Excessive involvement in activities with high potential for painful or negative consequences. Spending money they do not have. Engaging in a lot of sex or unprotected sex. Substance use or foolish business ideas that could have negatively impact their financial situation in some way. And the big difference here is it does not have a clinically significant impact on the person's functioning. And that's why it's more often associated with bipolar 2 disorder, because bipolar 2 disorder is not going to have a clinically significant impact on the person's functioning, or it does not require that it is. So kind of moving into bipolar 2 disorder, because we just kind of went over the symptoms. So I'm going to kind of go faster through it. So again, a key difference here is bipolar 2 disorder requires someone have an episode of depression, and where bipolar 1 disorder did not require that episode of depression. But an easy way to remember the length of time, bipolar 2 comes second, 2 plus 2 is 4, for 4 days or longer, because that's the length of time you need to be able to diagnose this mental health disorder. So I'm going to kind of go through the symptoms a little fast, because we went through them with bipolar 1 mania and hypomania, because bipolar 2 disorder is essentially just hypomania. So inflated sense of self-esteem or grandiosity, thinking they're better than they are. Decreased need for sleep, so feels rested after only 3 hours of sleep, or just not sleeping in general. They're more talkative than normal, or they feel pressured to have conversations with people, and when they don't, they kind of feel inferior about themselves. Flight of idea, where thoughts will run through someone's head and they cannot slow them down. Kind of wanting to do multiple things at the same time, not ever really able to keep up. Distractibility, or finds it difficult to stay on track. Increase in goal-oriented activities, wanting to do everything at the same time, not able to really ever accomplish it. So then they have low self-esteem at the end of it. Excessive involvement in activities with high potential for painful or negative consequences. Spending money they do not have. Engaging in a lot of sex or unprotected sex. Substance use or foolish business ideas. And again, the key emphasis here is it does not require it to have a clinically significant impact on someone's function in some way, shape, or form, where bipolar 1 requires the clinically significant impact. So kind of summarizing the difference between hypomania and mania, or bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, is the duration of symptoms and the impact it has on someone's life. So mania, often coined with bipolar 1, bipolar 1 or mania requires 1 week or longer. Bipolar 1 week or longer. It has to have hospitalization or negative impact on someone's function. So having that clinically significant impact is super duper important as well. So a couple of examples: Britney Spears, when she shaved her head or like dangled her baby over the balcony, she was not in her right mind and kind of more manic. Charlie Sheen, when he said he was having tiger's blood and like doing a whole bunch of drugs, cocaine, and just had whole manic type episodes. And then on the other side of the coin, hypomania, bipolar 2, 2 plus 2 is 4, 4 days or longer, and it does not have a clinically significant impact on someone's life. And if we want to go back, bipolar 2 also requires a depressive episode. So an example of this: someone is overproductive at work. They get fixated on task and often more productive with their time, yet they find it difficult to do one thing at a time, and they get involved in multiple things, which is not maintainable, and they become overwhelmed and not able to focus on the particular things that they've signed themselves up for. So those are our mood disorders, and we will get into the next category, which is our ADHD medications. So on the left is our brand name, and on the right is our generic name. So kind of some easy ways to remember this. We'll start with the generic names and then go to the brand names. The generic names have feta or fiend in the middle of them because people fiend for their feta cheese. So it's hard for them to stay focused on anything. So when you're seeing fiend or feta in the middle, that's what we are looking at. And then on the brand names, Adderall adds a sense of attention or concentration. Concerta helps them assert their attention in the moment. And then the other two, I don't really have a clever way to remember them, but when you see them, just kind of like keep note of them because there's not that many of them. So Ritalin and Vyvanse, and on the generic name again, feta and fiend in the middle because people fiend for their feta cheese. And the disorder that's often associated with this is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, inattention, and then the other category for it is hyperactivity impulsivity. And then there's a mixed presentation as well. So we'll start at the top with inattention. And if the person is 16 years or younger, it requires 6 or more symptoms, and 5 or more symptoms for adolescents 17 years old and older adults. So 6 or more for 16 and younger, 5 or more for 17 and older. And symptoms of inattention have been present for at least 6 months or longer, and it's inappropriate for the developmental age of where they're at. So kind of keep in mind as we go through the different symptoms, again, 6 or more for 16 and younger, 5 or more for 17 and older. So the symptoms are often fail to give close attention to details or make careless mistakes in schoolwork, at work, or with other activities. So the person's kind of like rushing, not really able to focus on the activity, and they make mistakes that if they were more concentrated or able to have attention, that they would have not made the mistake, and they don't notice that they're doing it when they're doing the behavior. They often have trouble holding attention during task or playing activities, so cycling through multiple different activities or getting bored easily when going through different activities often seem like they're not listening to the rules. So they may try to make their own rules, or they may not have paid attention to the rules. So they're doing things that aren't really corresponding with how the actual game or activity is supposed to be held. Often does not seem like they listen to others while being spoken to. So kind of being in their own world, or just kind of like getting distracted by things around them. So they're not really engaging in the activity or conversation with the other person. Often have difficulty with organization or organizing tasks and activities. So it's not that they don't get organized. It's just their sense of organization is different than other people, which causes them to lose things, or they may not remember where they have put the things. So they find it difficult to keep things in order or on track, and they have their own filtration system of how to stay organized. They often avoid things they dislike, or they're reluctant to do tasks that require a lot of mental effort or over a long period of time, such as schoolwork, work, or household chores. So it's difficult for the person to exert a lot of energy on one thing because they want to do other things. So they'll like channel that over there, or just hop to another activity, to the next activity, to the next activity, and may cycle back to the original activity, but it's difficult for them to want to stay focused and charged on the one thing at the time. They often lose things necessary for tasks and activities, such as schoolwork materials, pencils, paper, homework, house key, instructions, etc. And then it's difficult for them to remember where they put it because they weren't really paying attention when they had done that activity or behavior. And it's frustrating for the person because they want to remember and they know where they can picture it, but they can't really locate it. And they often get distracted by the things around them very, very easily. So the environment has to be very like poignant to their needs, and a lot of stimuli on the outside gets them distracted, and they want to engage in that behavior as well. And they often get things to do in their daily activities, or people have to remind them multiple times where they have to set reminders or take notes on what to do at that given moment. So it's very difficult for the person to kind of remember when they have to do things, but when they remember, they complete them very, very efficiently and effectively. So that's our inattention type. And one that is kind of very closely related and kind of has mixed presentation for some people is hyperactivity and impulsivity subtype. So the number of symptoms is the same for both. So 6 or more symptoms for 16 years old or younger, or 5 or more symptoms for adolescents 17 years or older and or adults. And hyperactivity and impulsivity symptoms must be present for 6 months or longer as well. So the length of time doesn't really vary in between the two subtypes or presentations, and it causes an impact that is disruptive and inappropriate for their developmental level. So that's consistent with our previous subtype of inattention. So the symptoms are as follows. Often fidget with or tap their hands, feet, or simply squirm in their seats. It's very difficult for them to sit still. It's like they have a motor inside of them and they want to get all of these things done, but they have all that energy keened and their body is just like bouncing back and forth. They often leave their seat in situations when remaining in their seat is expected. So they just get up and go roam around or do things. And other people are like, what are you doing? Like, why are you getting up out of your chair? And they're like, I don't know. I just kind of got bored in the activity or in the situation. They often roam about or climb in the situation where it's not appropriate. In adolescents or adults, this can be limited to feeling restless. They just have so much energy. It's like the Energizer Bunny, and they just want to do everything at the same time, and just and it's like they have an engine inside of them that doesn't ever really cease, and they want to get everything done at the same time. They are often unable to play or take part in leisure activities quietly, or bounce from task to task. So their just focus is everywhere, and they just want to do everything at the same time. They're like, this activity sounds fun. No, this one does, and this one does, and this one does. And then we return to the original one, often seem to be on the go or act as if driven by a motor. Again, the Energizer Bunny just wailing on that drum and trying to just restless energy out of nowhere. They often talk excessively or without much direction, so they kind of may talk themselves into a circle or just continue wanting to hear themselves go and speak, or they want to educate every single person on what they know, even when it may be inappropriate in the situation. They may often blurt out answers even before the question is finished because they don't really want to wait that time and they want to see if they're correct or not. So they're like that instant moment. They often have trouble waiting in lines or for when it's his or her turn. And again, may cut, may push. People may just be like, why are we waiting here? I don't even understand. And they just cannot sit still. They often interrupt or intrude on other people's conversation or games when they're not invited. They may just be like, when someone may be like, you can wait until it's your turn or the next game, they may just cut into the current game because they have a lot of energy and they just want to get in and on the situation, or they feel like they're missing out. So they kind of just jump ahead in the situation to see what that would look like as well. So, in addition to the 6 previous symptoms, or 12 if we want to count both onsets or presentation types, several inattentive or hyperactivity symptoms must be present before the age of 12 years old. So, if someone is older, again, you can be diagnosed with it, but it's a little bit more difficult because we need to have the presentation at an early age. Several of the symptoms are present in 2 or more settings. So a lot of times people will be like, this person can't stay still or calm down when they're at school, but when they get at home, they're like relaxed and calm. This may be the fact that they don't enjoy school at all. And so it has to be present in 2 or more settings. So it may have to coexist or with different friends or relatives or people, not just within one context. There's clear evidence that the symptoms interfere with or reduce the quality of the person's social, school, or work functioning in some way, shape, or form. So that clinically significant impact. The person's symptoms are not better explained by another mental health disorder, such as a mood disorder, mania, or hypomania, anxiety disorder, dissociative disorder, or personality disorder. And the symptoms are not happening as a result of a psychotic disorder, a schizophrenia, because some psychotic disorder or schizophrenia symptoms has some very flight of idea, charge of like motions, and are positive symptoms. And we'll get into that a little bit later. And based on the number of symptoms or criteria the person has or is exhibiting. Again, there's a combined presentation. So combined presentation is where they have enough criteria for inattention and hyperactivity or impulsivity. So they have enough symptoms for both. So 6 for inattention and 6 for hyperactivity and impulsivity. And the length of time is 6 months or longer. And then predominantly inattentive presentation is where they have enough criteria for inattention, so 6 or more, or 5 or more for adolescents and adults, but not for hyperactivity and impulsivity, and it's happening again for 6 months or longer. So the primarily or predominantly inattentive presentation is they have 6 or more only in the inattention, and that's been going on for 6 months or longer. And the predominantly hyperactivity, impulsivity, we are going to be looking at enough criteria for hyperactivity, impulsivity, but not for inattention, 6 or more for 16 and younger, or 5 or more for 17 and older and adults. And the criteria is the same for 6 months or longer. So now getting into the last type of medications and disorders that we will be looking at are antipsychotic disorders. And as we saw in the mood disorders, AP is how they can be coined, and they're more focused on psychosis, delusions, hallucinations, etc. And the brand name is on the left, generic name is on the right. And we'll start with the generic name. Most of them have INE and or done at the end. So if somebody is taking an antipsychotic medication, they are typically done. Why? Because it tends to slow them down quite a bit. And some of you may be saying INE was also for the antidepressants, but when we look at the names of the INE, they tend to be a little bit harsher than our antidepressant meds. And then on the brand name, you just have to kind of remember them, but the names kind of stick out. Haldol, Vraylar, Risperidol, Thorazine, Invega, Jodine, Clozaril, and Abilify. And again, INA are done. And kind of to summarize that, most of the generic names have done at the end of the name. When people take these medications, they are done. And the ones that are most commonly associated with this is going to be our schizophrenia spectrum. And it's on a spectrum because all of the symptoms typically are the same. It's just the amount of time that differentiates them. So at the beginning of the spectrum is brief psychotic disorder, emphasis on brief, because when we're looking at a brief length of time, it's 30 days or less most often. So this is where someone has a brief or short episode of psychosis. So stated in a different way, it's a thought pattern disorder in which the person will experience short gross motor deficits and reality testing manifested by at least one of the following, and it has to be 1, 2, and or 3. So when we look at that, we are going to have the duration again, less than 30 days or 1 to 30 days. And the symptoms are as follows. So delusions, false beliefs that are not based in reality, and the person refuses to give them up, even when presented with factual information. And that's going to be the key emphasis. Is you could be telling this person all the facts and all the things contrary to this, but they are going to be still on their stance of this is what is supposed to be happening. The second possibility is hallucinations, auditory, visual, tactile, olfactory, of things that are not actually there. So auditory are things that you're hearing, visual are things that you're seeing, tactile are things that you're feeling, olfactory are things that you're smelling that are not actually there. So some people can have all of these, some people can only have one of these, some people do not have any of them and then have one of the other symptoms. So if they don't have delusions and they don't have hallucinations, they are going to have disorganized speech, which is incoherent or irrational content or thought processes. So for example, someone is tangential or speaking about multiple topics that do not align or blend together. the theme of the speech is not entirely connected, and or the things that the person are saying are not entirely realistic. So it's kind of, you're not able to really follow them. They're kind of utilizing that word salad and doing all of these things in this given moment. It's like, well, I'm not really staying on track with what you're saying. Like, what are you actually saying? And the other symptoms that are possible: disorganized or catatonic behavior, so repetitive senseless movements or adopting a pose which may be maintained for hours at a time, or the individual may be resistant to efforts to move them in a different position, or if they assume the new position for hours as well when they are moved. And symptoms are not better explained by depressive disorder with psychotic features, or bipolar disorder with psychotic features, or another psychotic disorder such as schizophrenia or catatonia, and is not attributable to the physiological effects of substance or another medical condition. Because again, substances and medical conditions can tend to mirror mental health symptoms or mimic them. And if in absence of the substance or medical condition, they still have the mental health symptoms, we're looking at more of a mental health disorder. So again, remember, brief psychotic disorder is brief because it's a brief amount of time and requires one of the following of 1, 2, and or 3. So either delusions, hallucinations, and or disorganized speech. So now as we move down the spectrum, we have schizophrenia form. And the easiest way to remember this is to take out the middle, phrene, and look at it as the pre-form of schizophrenia. So schizophrenia form is the pre-form of schizophrenia. Why? Because it becomes before it. So if it's in the middle of brief psychotic disorder and schizophrenia, brief psychotic disorder was 30 days or less. Schizophrenia is going to be 6 months or longer. This one is going to fall in between that with at least 1 month period, 30 days, but less than 6 months. So you have to have at least 2 of the following symptoms. So it kind of opens up further than brief psychotic disorder, because brief psychotic disorder, you just had to have 1 or more of delusions, hallucinations, or disorganized speech. And then schizophrenia form tends to get a little more extensive because it's over a longer period of time. And again, that's 1 month, but less than 6 months of time. And symptoms 1 to 4 are considered positive symptoms, and symptoms 5 to 8 are considered negative symptoms. And if you think of positive symptoms of being like supercharged up and overthinking, that is what we're going to see when we see delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, or grossly disorganized or catatonic behavior. And the negative symptoms, think of a negative charge. Somebody does not have the energy to complete different tasks. And that's what we're going to be seeing when we look at those as well. So keep in mind, a lot of the criteria is the same, but let's go through it and give it its due diligence. So the first possibility is delusions, false beliefs that are not based in reality, and that the person refuses to give up, even when presented with that factual information. So you could be giving the person all the facts and how all the thoughts that they're having are not possible, but they're still holding true to what they know. Hallucinations, auditory, visual, tactile, olfactory, of things that are not actually there. Auditory, hearing, visual, seeing, tactile, things that you can feel. Olfactory, things that you can smell. And again, things that are not actually there. Disorganized speech, saying things that do not make sense, using made-up words that have no meaning, and or tangential speech where the person skips from topic to topic with no common theme. It's difficult to keep up with what they're seeing and what they're saying. Grossly disorganized or catatonic behavior, so repetitive senseless movements, adopting a position in which it's maintained for hours, and the individual may resist efforts to be moved in a different position or will assume the new position for hours as well. Pacing, walking back and forth, walking into circles, writing constantly of things that may not actually be possible or realistic. They might not even know what they're writing, but they figure out that it's super duper important. So they're writing super very, very fast, or writing letters to multiple people, or repetitive movements with no rhyme or reason. They're just kind of flailing or rocking back and forth in the situation. And then more of the negative symptoms, that lack of energy, someone's not having the motivation to want to do something or not wanting to complete things. Poor hygiene or lack of grooming, may not showering, they haven't showered or don't really do their ADLs, activities of daily living, or loss of interest in things that they would have enjoyed. So that's where it's kind of difficult in the situation as well, is it can mimic other mental health disorders. And that's what we'll get into now and withdrawal from friends and families and social activities. So not really interest of wanting to be close to other people as well. And schizoaffective disorder and bipolar disorder with psychotic features have been ruled out because one, no major depressive or manic episodes occur concurrently with the active phase symptoms, or if the mood episodes have occurred during the active phase symptoms, they've been present for a minority of the total duration. And then the disturbance is not better attributable to physiological effects of a substance or another medical condition in some way, shape, or form. So again, we know 100% in the absence of substances or in absence of a medical condition that they're still exhibiting the mental health symptoms that are present. And then at the very end of the spectrum is schizophrenia. So that is going to be the main disorder that we're looking at. And the criteria requirements are going to be 2 or more of the following symptoms. So same as schizophrenia form, but the main caveat is going to be 6 months or longer. So the spectrum, brief psychotic disorder, was 30 days or less. Schizophrenia form, in between, kind of in the sandwich, more than 30 days, but less than 6 months, because schizophrenia is 6 months or longer. And again, symptoms 1 to 4 are considered positive symptoms. So high energy, or the mind is going very, very quickly. So they're like supercharged up. So that's what those symptoms are mimicking. And symptoms 5 to 8 are considered negative symptoms because they have low energy or they're not progressing in any way, shape, or form. So the criteria is kind of the same. So I'm going to zip through it kind of fast. So delusions, false beliefs that are not based in reality and that the person refuses to give up, even when presented with the factual information. Again, you could give them all the evidence that you have contrary to what they believe, and they're going to stay true and strong to what they know and what they believe. Hallucinations, auditory, visual, tactile, olfactory, of things that are not actually there. Auditory, hearing, visual, seeing. Tactile is where you're feeling. Olfactory is where you're smelling. Things are not actually there. Disorganized speech, saying things that do not make sense, using made-up words that have no meaning, and or tangential speech where the person skips from topic to topic with no main theme, and it's hard for you to keep up with what they're saying. Grossly disorganized or catatonic behavior, so repetitive senseless movements, adopting a pose or position which may be maintained for hours. The individual may resist efforts to be moved, or if they are moved or put into a different position, they assume that new position for hours as well. Pacing or repetitive movements back and forth, walking in circles, writing constantly about things they may not even know what they're writing, but they want to get it out, or they're writing a ton of letters to other people because they want to share the message of what they're seeing. Repetitive movements with no rhyme or reason, the rocking back and forth, doing different movements, flailing around. They may lack the energy, not completing tasks, or not have the motivation to want to get things done. Poor hygiene or lack of grooming, not keeping up with their ADLs, not showering, not doing all of these things. Loss of interest in things they would have normally enjoyed, or just not fading away from that. And withdrawal from family, friends, and social activities when they normally would have been a social person or want to be around other people. They kind of have that paranoia of wanting to stay away from people and not wanting to be connected to people in some way, shape, or form. So for a significant portion of the time since the onset of the disturbance, level of function in 1 or more areas such as work, interpersonal relations, or self-care has been below the level achieved prior to the onset of symptoms. So they've had some regression in their situation. Schizoaffective disorder and bipolar disorder with psychotic features have been ruled out because either 1, no major depressive or manic episodes occurred concurrently with active phase symptoms, or 2, if mood episodes have occurred during active phase symptoms, they have been present for a minority of the duration of time, and the disturbance is not better attributable to the physiological effects of substance or another medical condition in some way, shape, or form. So kind of give you that quick review of that schizophrenia spectrum: brief psychotic disorder, 30 days or less; schizophrenia form, more than a month but less than 6 months; and schizophrenia, 6 months or longer. So there's not a whole lot of difference between the schizophrenia spectrum, but the length of time. So we went over the antidepressive medications, the depressive disorders associated with the anti-anxiety medications, and different anxiety disorders that you could see from there. We went over the mood stabilizers. We went over the difference between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, mania, hypomania, ADHD, the different subtypes and presentations there, and then went over the schizophrenia spectrum. So let's get into the practice questions. All right, question 1. A social worker at an outpatient clinic is completing an intake assessment with a 35-year-old male, reports finding it difficult to handle all the responsibilities in his life. The man reports he has been working at his current job for 5 years and that he always feels like he is going to be fired. The man reports that he often feels the urge to hurt people and that when he is not at work, he will lock himself in the house to prevent himself from acting on his thoughts. The man reports that he was previously hospitalized 1 year ago due to experiencing feelings of hopelessness. What is the most likely medication to improve the man's situation? A, Clozaril, B, Valium, C, Depakote, or D, Celexa? And when you have your answer, type the word water into the chat. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is C. Second place is D. Third place is B. Fourth place is A. Let's look at it. We're a social worker in an outpatient clinic, completed an intake assessment. So, first time meeting this person, and they're a 35-year-old male. So, that's our client who reports finding it difficult to handle all the responsibilities in his life. The man reports that he has been working at his current job for 5 years. Any length of time, jump on top of it because it paints the picture of what we're looking at, and that always feels like he's going to be fired. So, kind of maybe some paranoia or anxiety. The man reports that he often feels the urge to hurt people and that when he's not at work, he'll lock himself in the house to prevent himself from acting on his homicidal thoughts. And the man reports that he was previously hospitalized 1 year ago due to experiencing feelings of hopelessness. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints the picture of what we're looking at. So let's break down each of these meds and then we'll compare it back to the question and then go from there. So Clozaril is going to be that antipsychotic disorder or antipsychotic medication. Valium is going to be an anxiety medication. Depakote helps coat the mood, so it's a mood disorder or mood stabilizer. And Celexa helps us select the mood, so it's an antidepressant. So, quick review outpatient clinic intake. First time meeting a 35-year-old male, finding it difficult to manage all the responsibilities in his life. He's been at his job for 5 years, always feels like he's going to be fired, and he has the urge to hurt people when he's not at work. So, he's locking himself in the house to prevent from acting on his thoughts. And he was hospitalized 1 year ago due to experiencing feelings of hopelessness. So, keep that in mind as we go through each of the meds and rule them out. So the first one we're going to rule out is anxiety, because it does say that he fears that he's going to be fired from his job, but it doesn't say that he has like flight of idea. It doesn't say he's irritated. It doesn't say he's lack of motivation. It doesn't say he's wanting to fear being separated from people. It doesn't say that he has social anxiety, anything like that. So volume, we don't really want to turn down the volume of his anxiety because he does have probably more extensively like paranoia. We're going to rule out Celexa because even though he was hospitalized 1 year ago for feelings of hopelessness, there are other symptoms that are not related to depression that are present in the question. So he's finding it difficult to manage everything. He has like paranoia of being fired. Even though he's been at the job for 5 years, he still feels like he's going to be fired. He has the urge to hurt people. So he's locking himself in the house, like kind of like secluding himself, and he has a history of being hospitalized. So we have Clozaril or a psychotic disorder, or Depakote of more of like a bipolar 1, bipolar 2, or mood disorder at this given moment. So this is the tricky part of it. Doesn't have any other like manic symptoms because it have to have a clinically significant impact on the person's functioning, because being hospitalized is one of them, but it does not generate to much more than that, because with him always fearing that he's going to be fired from his job kind of alludes to more paranoia, and he has the urge to hurt people, so kind of like delusions type behavior. So when we look at that, we are going to rule out Depakote because we don't need to coat his mood. He's more exhibiting psychosis based on the fact that he has the urge to hurt people and paranoia of being fired from his job, and he was hospitalized for feelings of hopelessness. So he does have those negative symptoms as well. So the correct answer here is going to be Clozaril because we want to close the door on his psychotic behaviors. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 2. An emergency department social worker is completing an intake assessment with a 40-year-old female who reports feeling like nothing will ever get better. The woman reports that she has been finding it difficult to keep her thoughts straight, and there is not enough time in the day to accomplish everything she would like to. The woman reports that she has been avoiding her friends since she feels like they're going to make fun of her or hurt her in some way. The woman reports having nightmares and constantly worrying about everything. Which medication is the doctor most likely going to prescribe the woman? A, clozapine, B, clozapam, C, bupropion, D, Depakote. And when you have your answer, type the word coffee in the chat. Opening the polls. 20 more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is B. Second place is C. Third place is A. Fourth place is D. Let's look at it. We're an emergency department social worker, completed an intake assessment, first time meeting a 40-year-old female, reports feeling like nothing will ever get better. So feelings of a kind of hopelessness. The woman reports that she finds it difficult to keep her thoughts straight and there's not enough time in the day to accomplish things she would like to. So flight of idea. The woman reports she has been avoiding her friends since she feels like they're going to make fun of her or hurt her in some way. So kind of like anxious thoughts of social scrutiny. And she has nightmares and constant worry about everything. Let's break down each of these medications and then go from there. So clozapine, antipsychotic. Clozapam, PAM, LAM, anti-anxiety. Bupropion, antidepressant. And then Depakote is going to be that mood disorder. So quick review, emergency department social worker, intake assessment, 40-year-old female, feeling like things aren't going to get better, finding it difficult to keep her thoughts straight, not enough time in the day, and she wants to accomplish everything but doesn't get to it. She's been avoiding her friends since they're going to make fun of her in some way. So keep that in mind as we go through each of the answer responses. So we want to keep our location in mind as well. So we're in the emergency department. So in the emergency department, the goal of that is to make sure that we get people in and out as fast as we possibly can and come to a quick solution. So right off the get-go, we're going to rule out antidepressant because she's not really describing depression. She does have feelings of hopelessness, but that's about it and to the extent, plus the sleep disturbance. But again, keep in mind we're at an emergency department and bupropion or Wellbutrin is a med that is going to be longer term and need to be monitored in some way, shape, or form. We're also going to rule out clozapine or clozaril. Why? Because we are not looking at a psychosis type episode. Plus, we're in the emergency department. So we need a med. It's going to be fast acting and going to relate to the symptoms that we're seeing. Given she feels like people are going to make fun of her or hurt her in some way, but that sounds more of like anxiety rather than some paranoia. So we're either going to look at clozapam or Depakote. And in this case, we're going to rule out Depakote, go with the anti-anxiety med. Why? Because anxiety meds tend to be fast acting. We're in the emergency department, so we are going to be looking at what we're looking at, which anti-anxiety meds tend to be fast acting, and we want a quick solution since we are in the emergency department. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 3. A social worker at a community mental health agency is meeting with a 28-year-old male upon discharge from a hospital for a suicide attempt. The man reports feeling like regardless of what he does, that he will never be good enough. The man reports his mother recently died and that his girlfriend broke up with him last month. The man reports utilizing alcohol to cope with all of his stressors. The man would like to find ways to improve his mood and to stop losing everything. What medication would best supplement his treatment? A, Effexor, B, Ativan, C, Haldol, or D, Adderall? And when you have your answer, type the word happy in the chat. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is A. Second place is B and C. Third place is D. Let's look at it. We are a social worker and a community mental health agency. Our client is a 28-year-old male, and he is coming in upon discharge from a hospital for a suicide attempt. The man reports that feels, regardless of what he does, he's never going to be good enough. And the man reports his mother recently died, then his girlfriend broke up with him last month. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at that given moment. And he reports utilizing alcohol to cope with his stressors, and he would like to identify ways to improve his mood and stop losing everything. What med are we looking at? Let's break down each medication and go from there. So Effexor affects how your mood is going. So antidepressant. Ativan drives away your anxiety. So anti-anxiety. Haldol, going to be our antipsychotic. And then Adderall is going to be that ADHD. So a quick review, community mental health agency, 28-year-old male, just got out of the hospital for a suicide attempt. He feels like regardless of what he does, he's never good enough. His mother recently died and his girlfriend broke up with him last month. He's utilizing alcohol to cope. He wants to improve his mood and stop losing everything. What med are we most likely to see within this guy's situation? So right off the bat, we're going to get rid of Adderall because he's not struggling with any attention or anything like that. So no inattention or hyperactivity or impulsivity. If anything, it's total other end of the spectrum of feelings of hopelessness, that things aren't getting better, and just got out of the hospital for a suicide attempt. We're going to rule out Ativan because there's not any glimpse of anxiety, if anything, feeling like he's not good enough and losing a lot of things in his life. We're looking at antipsychotic or antidepressant. And when we look at this, there's no hallucinations, delusions, catatonic behavior, any lack of ADLs. So we're going to rule out Haldol, and we are going to go with Effexor because Effexor affects your mood in a positive way. And this dude is exhibiting depression. So if we incorporate Effexor, it could help him and reduce the likelihood that he goes back to the hospital for a suicide attempt and can help improve his mood. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 4. A social worker at a family agency is meeting with a father and his 8-year-old son who has been having issues in school. The father reports that the son's teacher has told him that the boy finds it difficult to complete his work and will often interrupt others while speaking. The boy reports that he finds school boring and that he just wants to spend time with his friends. The father would like his son to attend a psychiatric appointment or psychiatrist appointment. What medication is most likely to be prescribed to the boy? A. Vyvanse, B. Buspar, C. Wellbutrin, or D. Abilify. And when you have your answer, type the word hope into the chat. Opening up the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is A. Second place is D. Third place is C. Fourth place is B. Let's look at it. We are a social worker in a family agency meeting with the father and 8-year-old son. So they're both in the office with us. And the son has been having behavioral issues in school. The father reports that the son's teacher has told him that the boy finds it difficult to complete his work and will often interrupt people while they are speaking. And the boy tells us that he finds school boring and just wants to spend time with his friends, doesn't really see a point of it. And the father would like his son to attend a psychiatric appointment or psychiatrist appointment. So let's break down each of these meds and then go from there. So Vyvanse is an ADHD medication. And then Buspar is going to be an anti-anxiety. Wellbutrin helps someone feel well. So we're looking at an antidepressant. And Abilify, it changes someone's ability to feel good. So we're looking at a mood disorder or mood stabilizer. So quick review, family agency, meeting with a father, 8-year-old son. He's having behavioral issues in school. Father reports the son's teacher said he's finding it difficult to complete his work. He's interrupting other people as they're going along. And the son says he finds school boring. He just wants to spend time with his friends. So keep that in mind as we look through the different medications. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out Abilify because the son doesn't really sound like he has a mood disorder or needs his mood stabilized, because that would be more of a bipolar 1 or bipolar 2 type diagnosis. And we're not going to be throwing that at an 8-year-old, because you have to keep in mind the age of the lad that we are looking at. We're also going to rule out Wellbutrin because it doesn't say any symptoms of depression by any means. It's just that he's not completing his work, interrupting other people, finds it boring, wants to be social with other people. So are we looking at more of like an ADHD or more of an anxiety type situation? We're going to rule out Buspar because it doesn't say he has any anxiety or worry about it. Anything he just says this is boring. There's no point to this. I want to get on and spend time with my friends and interrupting other people. So having that engine or like intention. So we're looking more at a Vyvanse, and that is how we look at that question in particular. Question 5. A social worker in an outpatient setting is completing an intake assessment with a 35-year-old male who reports feeling like his friends are out to get him. The man reports that he has not been sleeping well for the past 8 days and that feels like his mind will not shut off. And the man reports spending money that he does not have and that he feels pressured to engage in conversation with everyone he meets. The man reports having a history of hospitalization and that he has been arrested for getting into fights with people. What medication would best treat the man's symptoms? A. Abilify, B. Invega, C. Xanax, or D. Zoloft? And when you have your answer, type the word Michigan in the chat. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is A. Second place is B. Third place is D. Fourth place is C. Let's look at it. We are a social worker in an outpatient setting, intake assessment. So, first time meeting a 35-year-old male. So, that's who our client is. And he reports feeling like his friends are out to get him in some way. And the man reports that he's not been sleeping well for 8 days. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints the picture of what we're looking at. And he feels like his mind will not shut off. So he has some flight of idea. The man reports spending money that he does not have, and he feels pressured to engage in conversation with everyone that he meets. So pressured speech. The man reports having a history of hospitalization and that he's been arrested for getting into fights with people, engaging with behavior that would be otherwise risky. So let's break down each of the medications, compare back to the situation, and see what we're looking at. Abilify helps someone improves their ability to operate. So we're looking at a mood stabilizer, and it could also be utilized as an antipsychotic. Invega is going to be an antipsychotic. Xanax is going to be an anti-anxiety because it's going to be Xing out the anxiety, and then Zoloft, let's loft our mood up to improve it. So we're looking at an antidepressant. So quick review, outpatient setting, intake assessment, first time meeting a 35-year-old male, and he reports feeling like his friends are out to get him. He's not been sleeping well for the past 8 days, and he feels like his mind's not shutting off. So that flight of idea, spending money that he does not have, and then he feels pressured to engage in speech and conversation with everyone he sees, and history of hospitalization and being arrested for fights. So keep that in mind as we look through each of these answers. Right off the get-go, we're going to rule off Zoloft because Zoloft, he's not really experiencing or exhibiting or reporting any depressive symptoms. Doesn't really have low mood, low self-esteem, lack of concentration, anything like that. We're going to rule out Xanax because he isn't really describing a lot of anxiety. He says he feels like his friends are out to get him. There's no real danger there. So maybe some paranoia there. Not sleeping well. That could be kind of linked to it. But he's also saying his mind's not shutting off. He's spending more money than he has. He's feeling pressured to engage in speech with everybody. And he's been hospitalized. So are we looking at a mood disorder or are we looking at a psychotic disorder in some way, shape, or form? So at this given moment, we don't have any delusions, no hallucinations, no catatonic behavior, no disorganized speech, or any negative symptoms. And the length of time is 8 days. So we have kind of that flight of idea. People are out to get him. Not sleeping well, so sleep disturbance, flight of idea, clinically significant impact of spending money that he does not have, pressured speech, and behaviors that are risky. So we're ruling out in Vega and we're going to go with Abilify because we're looking at more of a mood disorder, aka bipolar 1 disorder. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 6. A social worker at an outpatient clinic is working with a 38-year-old female who reports having difficulty sleeping for the past 2 weeks. The woman reports that she has been getting a lot of ideas of what she can do in her life and that she cannot keep up with them all. The woman reports that she has spent all of her money on materials to advance her life and is now at risk for losing her house. The woman has never been hospitalized and denies ever being on medications. What is the most likely diagnosis for this woman? A, bipolar 1 disorder, B, bipolar 2 disorder, C, generalized anxiety disorder, or D, schizophrenia form. And when you have your answer, type the word tricky in the chat. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. shutting down the polls. The majority think it is A, second place is B, third place is C, fourth place is D. Let's look at it. We are a social worker in an outpatient clinic. We're working with a 38-year-old female, so that's our client. They're reporting having difficulty sleeping for the past 2 weeks, any length of time. Hop on top of it because it paints the picture of what we're looking at. The woman reports that she's been getting a lot of ideas that she can do in her life and she can't keep up with them all. So, kind of some flight of idea, not really wanting to follow through or not being able to follow through. She spent all of her money on materials to advance her life and is now at risk for losing her house. That's a clinically significant impact if I know one. And the woman has never been hospitalized or denies being on meds, so does not have any psychiatric intervention in any way, shape, or form. So let's break down each of the disorders, compare it back to the question, and see what we're looking at in this situation. So bipolar 1 disorder, we can have mania or hypomania. And then let's break down each of these. So mania is going to be 7 days or longer, or 1 week or longer, or hypomania is going to be 4 days or longer. And then another emphasis is it does not require an episode of depression, and it requires a clinically significant impact. And then bipolar 2 disorder, we're going to be looking at hypomania, which comes second. 2 plus 2 is 4, 4 days or longer. It does require an episode of depression, and it does not require a clinically significant impact on the person's functioning. And then generalized anxiety disorder, we're looking at 6 months or longer. And then schizophrenia form, longer than 1 month, but less than 6 months. So quick review, outpatient clinic, 38-year-old female, 2 weeks is the length of time. She's been getting a lot of ideas that she can do in her life. She can't keep up with all of them. She spent all of her money and is now at risk for losing her house. And she's never been hospitalized or been on any medications in any way, shape, or form. So keep that in mind as we go through the different considerations. So right off the get-go, we're going to remove generalized anxiety disorder because it does not have any inclination or anything based on anxiety in any way, shape, or form. And we are also going to rule out schizophrenia form because it doesn't have any delusions, hallucinations, catatonic behavior, or pressured speech or disorganized speech in any way, shape, or form. So we're looking at bipolar 1 disorder, mania, 7 days or longer, or 1 week or longer, hypomania, 4 days or longer. It does not require an episode of depression, and it requires a clinically significant impact. Or bipolar 2 disorder, hypomania, 4 days or longer. It requires an episode of depression and does not require clinically significant impact. So we have 2 weeks. So mania and or hypomania would fall in. Having that flight of idea, she spent all of her money and is now at risk for losing her house. So that's a clinically significant impact. Never been hospitalized, denies any meds, and it does not cite any episodes of depression. So bipolar 2 disorder would step aside, and we'd have bipolar 1 disorder because we have that clinically significant impact based on the fact that she's about to lose the house and has all of these symptoms and falls in the time frame of 2 weeks, and more of mania, 7 days or longer. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 7. A social worker at a community mental health clinic is meeting with a mother and her 9-year-old son who's having behavioral issues at school for the past 6 months. The mother reports that the son has been sent home multiple times for pushing other children while waiting in lines, will run around the classroom when completed with this work and interrupt other people while they are talking. The child reports that he does not feel like other people. He does not like other people and feels like they are too slow and need to stay out of his way. What diagnosis best explains the boy's behavior? A. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. B. Separation anxiety disorder. C. Generalized anxiety disorder. Or D. Oppositional defiant disorder. And when you have your answer, type one thing that you're looking forward to this week. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is A. Second place is D. Third place is C. Fourth place is B. Let's look at it. We are a social worker and community mental health clinic meeting with the mother and 9-year-old son. And the 9-year-old son is going to be our client, and he's been having behavioral issues at school for the past 6 months. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints the picture of what you're looking at. The mother tells us that the son has been sent home multiple times for pushing other children while waiting in lines, running around the classroom, and interrupting other people while they're talking. And the child reports he does not like other people and feels like they're too slow and they need to get out of his way. What disorder are we looking at? So let's break down each of the possible disorders, compare it back to the question to see what we're looking at in the situation. So ADHD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So lack of patience, not being able to sit still, and well, we'll leave seat when it is not appropriate and will appear to have a motor in them. And length of time is going to be 6 months or longer. And then separation anxiety disorder, someone who worries about someone they care about being harmed. They are fixated on the potential that their caregiver or parent will leave them. and they become distressed when their attachment figure leaves them. And we are also looking at 4 weeks or longer for a child. And then generalized anxiety disorder, we're looking at 6 months or longer of irritability, constant worry, lack of concentration, and worrying about multiple things at the same time. And then oppositional defiant disorder, or ODD, is when a child will be defiant towards people of authority, and they do not care about respecting others. So quick review: community mental health clinic, meeting with a mother and 9-year-old son. He's having behavioral issues at school. It's been going on for 6 months. The mother reports that her son has been sent home multiple times for pushing other children, not waiting in line, running around the classroom when his work is completed, and are going to interrupt people while they are talking. The child does not like other people and feels like they are too slow, and they need to stay out of his way. So right off the get-go, we're going to rule out separation anxiety disorder because it doesn't say he's becoming distressed when he's separated from the mom or anyone in the situation. He just simply does not like a whole lot of people, wants to have a lot of energy, feels like he has an engine in him. Also going to rule out generalized anxiety disorder because it doesn't say the kid's anxious at all or that he's worrying about a lot of things or anything like that. So we're either looking at A, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or D, oppositional defiant disorder. And we are going to rule out oppositional defiant disorder because it doesn't say he's defying the teacher because he simply doesn't like her or just a spider. He simply is just not able to get away from the hyperactivity or impulsivity and just wants to have fun. So we're looking at ADHD here. So that is how we're going to look at this question in particular. Question 8. A 21-year-old man has been working with a social worker at a community mental health clinic for the past 3 months. The man reports hearing voices that tell him to hurt his parents, and they have caused him to isolate from social situations. The man reports finding it difficult to sleep and that he feels like someone from his dreams is going to hurt him. The man denies ever being hospitalized and that he can keep his symptoms under control. What would be the most likely diagnosis for this man? A, social anxiety disorder, B, brief psychotic disorder, C, schizophrenia form, or D, schizophrenia. And when you have your answer, type one positive thing in the chat. Opening up the polls. 20 more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is C. Second place is D. Third place is B. No one thought A. Let's look at it. So we're seeing a 21-year-old man, and we are in a community mental health clinic, and he's been coming for 3 months, any length of time. Hop on top of it because it paints the picture of what we're looking at this given moment. The man reports hearing voices that tell him to hurt his parents, and they have caused him to isolate from social situations, so secluding himself. The man reports finding it difficult to sleep, and that he feels like someone from his dreams is going to hurt him. And the man denies ever being hospitalized, and it can keep his symptoms under control. Let's break down each diagnosis and then go from there. So, social anxiety disorder is going to be 6 months or longer, and the person does not engage in social situations because they fear being judged. And then brief psychotic disorder is going to be less than 30 days, and that's going to be the positive and negative symptoms of schizophrenia. But again, it's going to require less. Schizophrenia form is going to be more than 1 month, yet less than 6 months. And then schizophrenia is going to be 6 months or longer, and again, positive and negative symptoms. And then just to be kind of consistent, positive and negative symptoms. So, quick review: 20-year-old man, community mental health clinic, 3 months. He's hearing voices that tell him to hurt his parents. They caused him to isolate from social situations. He's finding it difficult to sleep. Feels like someone from his dreams is going to hurt him. He denies ever being hospitalized, and then it can keep his symptoms under control. So, what is this 21-year-old man experiencing? We're automatically going to rule out social anxiety disorder because, yes, he's isolated from social situations, but it's predicated on hearing voices that tell him to hurt people. And in this situation, it's his parents, and he doesn't want to fear hurting other people. So we're looking at brief psychotic disorder, schizophrenia form, or schizophrenia. It's been going on for the past 3 months. We're going to rule out brief psychotic disorder and schizophrenia based on the fact that it's only been going on for 3 months. And he is saying he's hearing voices. So auditory hallucinations, isolating themselves, and having some fear, paranoia. So the correct answer here is going to be schizophrenia form based on the fact that it's in the middle of the schizophrenia spectrum. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 9. A social worker is meeting with a 55-year-old female who reported not feeling like herself. The woman reports that her husband passed away a year and a half ago, so 1.5 years ago, and that she took it pretty hard. She reports that she did not leave her house for 6 months, but did not find pleasure in anything, stopped attending church, and would have missed Christmas last year if her children did not drive to her house and convince her to go. The woman reports that right when she started to feel better, that her daughter was killed in a car crash 3 months ago, which brought back all of her depression. What diagnosis best explains what the woman is experiencing? A, persistent depressive disorder, B, major depressive disorder, C, generalized anxiety disorder, or D, adjustment disorder with depressed mood. And when you have your answer, type one thing that you're grateful for in your life right now. Opening up the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is B. Second place is A. Third place is D. Fourth place is C. Let's look at it. We are a social worker that is meeting with a 55-year-old female. She reported not feeling like herself. She reports that her husband passed away a year and a half ago or 1.5 years ago. Any length of time, hop on top of it, paints a picture of what we're looking at. She took it pretty hard. She reports that she did not leave the house for 6 months, did not find pleasure in anything, stopped attending church, and would have missed Christmas if her children did not come and check on her and say, "You are coming." Any length of time, hop on top of it. So 6 months this went on. No one reports that right when she started to feel better, that her daughter was killed in a car crash 3 months ago. Any length of time, hop on top of it. Why? It paints the picture of what we're looking at, which brought back all the depression. What diagnosis best explains what the woman is experiencing? So let's break down each diagnosis and go from there. So persistent depressive disorder is 2 years or longer of depressive symptoms. Major depressive disorder is 2 weeks or longer of depressive symptoms. Generalized anxiety disorder is going to be 6 months or longer. And then adjustment disorder with depressed mood is going to be symptoms within 1 to 3 months, but not longer than 6 months. And the huge caveat here is the reaction is beyond what normally expected for the adjustment. So quick review, 55-year-old female, not feeling like herself. Her husband passed away a year and a half ago. She took it pretty hard. She didn't leave the house for 6 months. She didn't find pleasure in anything, stopped going to church. She would have missed Christmas if she didn't have good kids that come and made her get out of the house. And she was starting to feel better. And then her daughter died in a car crash 3 months ago, which brought back all the depression. So she did not even get 3 months of remission from her depression. And then it came back. So right off the get-go, we're going to rule out generalized anxiety disorder because it does not describe any anxiety in the situation. We're looking at more of depression. So we have persistent depressive disorder, we have major depressive disorder, or we have adjustment disorder with depressed mood. So we are going to rule out adjustment disorder with depressed mood because some people may look at it and be like, well, dude, she didn't leave the house for 6 months. She stopped getting pleasure from anything. She didn't go to church. She was going to leave or stay away from Christmas. That is beyond what is normally expected. And to that, I would say you are kind of on the right track, but this all started a year and a half ago. She did this for 6 months. And 3 months ago, it all reset. So within this, it's not longer than 6 months. So it's a little bit deeper than just adjustment disorder with depressed mood. So are we looking at persistent depressive disorder or major depressive disorder? And persistent, again, is going to be 2 years or longer with not longer than 3 months of absence of symptoms. And since it's only been going on for a year and a half, we're going to rule out persistent depressive disorder and go with major depressive disorder because it's 2 weeks or longer, and she has not had longer than 2 years of time with the depressive symptoms. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 10. A social worker in an outpatient clinic is meeting with a 29-year-old male for concerns of excessive anger. The man reports that whenever he's away from his wife, that he constantly worries about her and he feels that someone is going to hurt her. The man reports that he calls her phone constantly, which has caused arguments in their relationship. The man reports that he cares about his wife and is unsure how to improve his situation to stay in the relationship. What is the most likely diagnosis for the man? A, generalized anxiety disorder, B, separation anxiety disorder, C, schizophrenia, or D, panic disorder. And when you have your answer, type one thing that you learned from this session tonight. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is B. Second place is A. Third place is D. No one thought C. Let's look at it. We're a social worker in an outpatient clinic. We're meeting with a 29-year-old male for concerns of excessive anger. The man reports that whenever he's away from his wife, he'll constantly worry about her and he feels like someone's going to hurt her in some way. And the man reports that he calls her phone constantly, which has caused arguments in the relationship. And the man reports that he cares about his wife and is unsure how to improve his situation to stay in the relationship. So let's break down each diagnosis, compare it back to the question, and see what we are looking at. So generalized anxiety disorder is 6 months or longer. And we're looking at irritability, constant worry, lack of concentration, worrying about multiple things, and easily fatigued. Separation anxiety disorder is someone who worries about a significant attachment figure when they are away from them, and they fear that they will be harmed in some way. They become distressed when away from them. Schizophrenia, 6 months or longer, and we're looking at the positive and negative symptoms. And then panic disorder is those physiological symptoms or physical symptoms associated with anxiety and a fear of having panic attacks. Quick review: outpatient clinic, 29-year-old male, concerns of excessive anger. He reports that when he is away from his wife, that he constantly worries about her and he feels like someone's going to hurt her. The man reports that he calls her constantly, which has caused arguments in the relationship. The man reports that he cares about his wife and is unsure how to improve his situation to stay in the relationship. Right off the get-go, rule out schizophrenia. Doesn't have any delusions, hallucinations, anything like that. Does have some paranoia, but let's just say it is predicated on the fact that he is away from his wife and that he feels like someone's going to hurt her. It doesn't say that he's visioning people hurting her or anything like that. We're going to rule out panic disorder because it does not say that he has any physiological symptoms, headaches, anything like that. And again, if it did, was it predicated based on the fact that he was away from his wife, which is the significant attachment figure? And we are also going to rule out generalized anxiety disorder because he's not anxious in general. He's more or less anxious only about his wife when he is away from her, which has caused some distress in the relationship because he is constantly blowing up the phone and saying, "Where are you at? I'm really, really worried about her." And she's like, "Dude, just leave me alone. I'm trying to do my thing." So the correct answer here is going to be separation anxiety disorder. So that's how we look at that question in particular.